Well, welcome to Markers and Milestones, where we explore educational opportunities for young men and women beyond traditional college, all from a Christ-centered perspective. I'm Lee Bortons, and I'm here with my co-host, Amanda Kleist. Today is Wednesday, February 21st, 2024, and we're joined by a new friend, Lindsay Mumma, rhymes with Puma, a chiropractor and homeschooling mom that I enjoyed having dinner with recently. We were having such a delightful conversation, and you knew about so many things I didn't know about that I was like, okay, I want other people to hear what you're telling me. And so I invited you to be on our Markers and Milestones, which, if you're not familiar with it, Amanda Kleist and I were both with Classical Conversations, and Emma, as our producer, went through CC. And we're having these interviews so that folks who just haven't thought about different career paths and how you get to different, markers in life. We want them to hear from people who have actually been successful. And so you had a really interesting story about your journey in the medical community. And I was hoping you would tell us a little bit about you and your homeschooling background, and then tell us how you got involved in healthcare.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I'm really honored to be here, and I loved talking with you, and so I'm glad that we get to continue the conversation.
Mhm.
And I had already known about Classical Conversations because one of my best friends is one of the families that has been involved with it for years, and so she has spoken so highly of it, and I was like, oh, I'm actually meeting the person who made this whole thing happen. That was really cool. And so just your impact on the greater community. And I think for so many people, the idea of homeschooling is really, really, really intimidating. And the way that you have things set up where it's giving people a framework that they can utilize to then continue schooling at home. And for us and our family, I told my husband when I was in my first year of practice as a chiropractor that I think we should homeschool our kids. And he said, we don't have any. And I said, yes, I just am seeing 30-year-olds with low back pain, and that doesn't make sense to me. So I was 26 years old when I started my practice. Tomorrow is actually my birthday, and I had just turned 26. I was a little upset because I graduated undergrad early, and then therefore got to start into my chiropractic degree program at a little bit earlier. And so when I graduated, I was 25, and I was hoping that I was going to be able to start a birthday at before my birthday, so that I was a quarter of a century old. And that didn't happen. I was 26, but I was just such a baby when I was starting into practice. And I was seeing people who were only 4 years older than me who were like, yeah, it's just kind of one of those things with aging, my back is hurting. And I thought, is this really what I have to look forward to in 4 years? And that's not very, that doesn't look up for me. I don't like the idea of that. And, from a chiropractic perspective, it doesn't make any sense that someone at 30 just has low back pain as a quote normal part of aging, because that's not the case. Human biomechanics are actually perfectly designed so that we can exist pain-free. But when we start sitting at age 5. And then when we need to make sure that we're ready to sit at age 5, so we start sitting kids at 3 years old. And then we start sitting kids at 18 months old, so that the kids who are in their daycare is now being called school. And we're teaching these kids not lessons and valuable insights. We're teaching these kids how to crowd control themselves at a young age. And so by the time you're 30, you have now spent 29 years sitting. And that is terrible for your spine, because it's not like we're sitting in ergonomic seats, and it's not like we have, we're in communities where we're sitting in upright postures and weaving baskets together. We're sitting in horrible desks with terrible posture and absolutely just deteriorating our spinal health over time. And it's creeping up where it's becoming earlier and earlier and earlier. And so I told my husband, I think we should homeschool our kids. And my husband is a public school teacher. And so that's a very interesting thing to say. His mother and both of my parents were also in education. So my and it's amusing to me that my brother also homeschools his kids. And so my brother's wife is pregnant with their 7th child, and they homeschool their kids. We only have 2 kids. I'm very happy with 2 kids. I'm very happy with 7 nieces and nephews from my brother, and then we have 2 nieces and nephews who are in public school. My husband's sister's kids, and just the interesting things that you can pick up on as soon as you meet a child. For me, if a child comes into my practice, I can tell if they've been in school or if they're homeschooled. First of all, the kids who come in who are in school are significantly cleaner than the kids who are homeschooled, because they're inside all day and they haven't gone out and gotten muddy, and they don't have like twigs and grass and sand that they're bringing in that I have to vacuum my table afterward. And I am thrilled to do it. But they don't make eye contact with me as much, because they're told that they're not supposed to talk to adults, because the adult will call on them when it's their turn to talk. And there's just there's a necessity of understanding how to behave in larger groups of people. But we learn that not because someone says, sit down until I call on you, but because we understand respectful communication. And so the kids who aren't in a school situation where someone says, be quiet on repeat all day, they'll talk with me and they'll tell me what's going on with their body and what activities they've been up to, just so much more freely than the kids who've been told that it's not right to speak to someone unless they call on you. And so the idea that we send kids to school to socialize them is so silly to me, because they don't learn social skills. They learn to be quiet until they're allowed to make any noise at recess. And they learn only to interact with children of their exact age, which, Lee, we're not the same age. I don't know how old you are. I'm about to turn 38 tomorrow, though. But we sat down and had a great dinner together. We would not have met each other had we been in school together.
That's right.
We wouldn't have had the chance to interact because we're of different ages. And so we'd be in different grades, and there's no crossover.
Yeah.
Right. And so it didn't make sense to me that I would send my future children to a place where they would sit all day and they wouldn't learn to talk to people, and they wouldn't learn the value that they could bring to a conversation unless it was plucked out of them. And they would learn what I learned, which was to be really good at taking tests, but not necessarily good at receiving information and then putting that into their life.
Yeah.
So I said we should homeschool our kids before we had kids. And then when we did have kids, then it became very apparent that yes, absolutely. I don't want to spend 8 hours away from my child every day. I like my kids. I want to be around them. So
That's the Amanda and I had that same experience. I want you to finish the thought you started with, and then turn more of the attention towards your actually your career here in chiropractic. So go back even younger. You mentioned 18 months, and one of the things you said to me that was really interesting was that now with all these baby devices, that even our infants don't get to move properly. We have,
yes.
even though we really are addressing more 17, 18-year-old age group, in our podcast here. I want you to finish that thought, because what I want
Yes.
you to address more is that fact that we're looking at, you're interested in how health affects educational ability also. And so how possibly being in the healthcare system that you're in would make it so that moms and dads who are going to continue homeschooling can, maybe with their own children, know that it's a potential career, because you managed to do both. So go ahead and finish
Yeah.
that thought about the spine, and then
So
let's move on.
yeah. So the beautiful part of human development is that we don't actually have to teach it. And if we do teach it, we teach it wrong, because none of us is quite as creative as our creator. None of us is quite as able to put together a sequence of movements that actually allows for full human development to unfold. So if you sit a baby before they can sit, then what happens? Their lumbar spine, so the low part of their back, their lumbar spine actually goes into a reverse curve, meaning that instead of there being a little bit of a sway to the back actually rounds. And so if a child sits in an upright position before they've actually earned the ability to sit by getting themselves into that position, their spinal development is literally stunted. And it will forever be changed. The first year of life and development within the first year is crucial for all of our joints to be formed. So if a baby has like a wonky crawl where they only crawl with one leg up, for example, we think, oh, that's totally fine because they got to walking and they figured it out. Well, yes, that's true. But if they don't actually crawl equally with both knees down and with both sides ambulating appropriately, then their hip joint on the side that isn't loaded as correctly will not form fully. So then when that child goes to play soccer when they're 14, they're more likely to injure their hip and therefore their low back than a child who actually had the opportunity to crawl. Most children develop perfectly normally and we just get in the way. 3 out of 10 babies will have some amount of movement discrepancy that requires someone like me, a chiropractor who has information regarding human development, or a physical therapist, someone to kind of intervene and help them along that path. But what tends to happen is that most people interrupt their child's development unintentionally because they want to ensure that their kid is going to learn to sit. But if you learn to sit, you actually disrupt the seating pattern that we actually have innately. So you don't teach a baby to roll over. But between 4.5 and 7.5 months, they actually develop the muscle sling activity and the brain activity that allows them to roll over. And if you teach a baby to sit, you'll do it inappropriately. If you teach a baby to walk, so a lot of people will hold their baby's hands and like walk along with them, that teaches them an inappropriate walking pattern. It's just a pattern based on compensation. So when we interject ourselves into that perfect unfolding of the first year of life, we actually ruin it. So then, if that's the path that we're on, and up until 12 months, we're like teaching our kid, okay, well, now you need to sit up, and now you need to roll over, and now you need to crawl, and now you need to do this next step. And we're kind of rushing their process a little bit because we're not trusting that they're actually going to be able to achieve their normal human movement. Then at 18 months, we're like, okay, well, now it's time for your preschool and you're going to go and sit in that. The lumbar spine position is called a kyphosis. It's supposed to be a lordosis, but there's a reversal if that child has been sat before they can sit. So now they're going to sit with their kyphotic lumbar spine. They're basically sitting on their tailbone instead of sitting up on their pelvis. They don't have the ability to stay upright. And now they're being asked to sit for hours a day when they're toddlers. And it just interrupts the development of that child and all of their joints and their entire body. So then by the time they get to 30, of course they have low back pain because they've been
Yes. So we've
introduced to
disrupted their
inappropriate patterns.
natural, so it sounds like
Yep.
we've disrupted their natural markers and milestones. And one of the ones you pointed out to me is that we put them in these car seats that are also strollers, that are also countertop ways, and the child's in
Yes.
the seat way more often than it should be.
Yes. And it's convenient for the parents, right?
Mhm.
Because if your baby is sleeping, you don't want to wake your baby up. You need to go into the grocery store and you need to run here and run there and whatever other things. And so it's just easy to pop the car seat into the car and then take that car seat out of the car, put it into the stroller, and then take that out of the stroller and put it into the house.
Mhm.
And you're moving your baby in this hard plastic C-shaped position, which is not the position of spinal development. It's actually it's literally there for safety. A car seat is there to save your child's life in the event of a car accident. It should not be used for transportation outside of a car. It shouldn't be used to move your baby from point A to point B unless point A to point B is in a car, because that convenience for the parents is actually at the cost of the child's development. Like their physical development is being interrupted because it's more convenient for us as parents to not wake the baby up and to not allow our day to be interrupted by the inconvenience of a baby who's unhappy that they didn't get quite the nap that they wanted, right? And it becomes more challenging the more children that you add to the mix, right? But I think that the anti-fragility that we expect out of children, we should do it with respect to their physical form. So
Mhm.
we expect that they're resilient enough, they'll be fine that they didn't get quite a good enough nap, right? But we don't actually think in terms of, oh, well, they've spent 6 hours in a car seat now today, and they didn't have the opportunity to move their spine and to explore movement and to actually feel what it feels like to be on the ground and to roll around and to pick their head up and to look to one side and look to the other side and ensure that they had all of that. We don't give them the opportunity to learn movement and be resilient there. We just kind of write them off that they'll be fine. And that's what I've just had so many patients say to me, well, yeah, I never crawled, but I'm fine. I'm like, you're in my office with pain. I don't think you're fine. And that's the argument that we were talking about, oh, well, I went to public school and I'm fine, quote, right? There are so many things that I had to unlearn so that I could be able to retain information that I wanted, so that I could become a student of life instead of a student of test taking. And,
Okay. So let me get you back on then about your actual journey to becoming a chiropractor. How did you become one? What was your path? Because I know there's a variety of them. And
yeah, so my best friend and I have the same birthday, and every year it's so embarrassing, but she sends me a note that she still has that I sent her when we were in high school. It's terrible. They're so awful. And so we would pass notes back and forth to each other because that's the education system that I was in. And she actually sent me one of the notes that I sent her, which was me talking about how terrible my back hurt. So when I was in high school, I played volleyball, I was a cheerleader, and I ran track. And all of I was very active in all of those things. When track season came around, all of a sudden my back really started to hurt me. And I remember asking my coach and asking a bunch of other people, like, what is this that's kind of like right above my hip here on the left? And it just was like hurting all the time, but it would hurt worse after I ran. And so I had actually gone to see a chiropractor, and it didn't really help much. And so I went through a slew of other tests, and I saw a handful of other practitioners. So I had, so if you're an extension based athlete, meaning that you do a lot of back arching type of activities. So volleyball and cheerleading and track all involve those, because I was a hurdler and a long jumper. And so a lot of extension based activities that I was doing, and I had low back pain. So people in the healthcare field would assume, like if I gave that case presentation, I said, okay, 15-year-old female athlete, these are the sports she plays, she's got low back pain. What's your most likely diagnosis? The most likely diagnosis would be a pars fracture or a spondylolisthesis. Pars fracture would be more likely. And so that means that there's a small fracture in the spine. I did not have that. And so I had x-rays done and MRI to confirm that what the x-ray didn't show us wasn't there. And then because that wasn't the case, the orthopedist had no idea what could be wrong with me, because there wasn't a thing on an image that he could point to and say, this is where your pain is coming from. And so I got sent to the gynecologist, and they thought maybe I would have ovarian cysts, and those were causing back pain. So I had an ultrasound done. And when that came back clear, then they thought, well, maybe you just have some strange form of metastatic cancer. And so I had a bone scan done. And I was just kind of taken through the ringer of running all of these tests. And I was actually put on Vioxx, which that was an FDA approved medication that turned out to kill everyone's grandma. And I was on that for 6 months before it was recalled because it was killing people. And so I was basically failed by the entire medical system. And a friend of mine said, you should see this chiropractor that I saw, because she was really helpful for me. And she was the very first person. It was basically a 10-month period of me just in and out of different doctors' offices, and everyone saying, you're too young for back pain, and me agreeing with them, but still having back pain. And so I went to see this woman, and she's like 5 inches shorter than me. And she said, I can help you. And I was like, what sort of, who does she think she is? Like, how dare she assume that she can help me? None of these other people could help me. But I left her office that day, and I felt better for the first time in almost 10 months, because first of all, I had hope. And I was running out of that myself, because I'm a very optimistic person. But after that long of a period of time, of every single time that I did activity, I would go home and cry and lay on an ice pack, and it was miserable. And she delivered me a dose of hope that she could help me. And that was new and refreshing. And then within a week, I was like, I am definitely noticeably feeling better. And within 2 weeks, I was almost pain-free. And within a couple more treatments, I was completely pain-free. And then all of a sudden I stopped getting these migraines that I'd had since I was 8 years old. And I thought, I want to do this for other people. And so I finished high school. I went to undergrad. I actually majored in English because I started to do all of the science heavy programs, and I was playing volleyball in college, and everything sucked, honestly. It was just not very fun to be playing volleyball and then also doing a biology major and taking multiple labs. And I just felt like I'd never had time to breathe. I was like, maybe I'm not supposed to be a chiropractor. Maybe this isn't the path for me. And I tried to change my major, and then I realized that what I really wanted to do was help people. And so I switched my major back. I majored in English because English is a strong suit of mine. And I thought, well, I could take my science courses as electives, get my bachelor's degree, graduate early, and then start my chiropractic degree. And so that's what I did. And so I went to undergrad. I was in undergrad for 3.5 years. And then I went on to Palmer College of Chiropractic, and that's a 3 1/3 year program that I went to afterward. And so upon graduating, then I moved here to Raleigh and opened a practice.
So do you need to, so our audience may not know how to become a chiropractor, but I think a lot of them are interested in holistic, natural kind of medicine. So did you have to
Mm-hmm.
go to college? Could you have started earlier? Who was there besides Palmer? Just tell us some of the pathways to this.
Yeah. So actually, the University of Pittsburgh just sent out a message this week that they are opening a chiropractic program. And it is, I believe, 8 trimesters. So I had 10 trimesters. So this is a little bit more of an accelerated program. Some of the schools, so Palmer did have a program where you could do your BS and your DC together, so that you could complete your Bachelor of Science degree and then complete your Doctor of Chiropractic. You had to have you had to have prerequisites in order to get into Palmer taken. So some people would just take those at a community college or a smaller school and then transfer into Palmer and finish out their bachelor's degree along with their doctorate degree. Most of the programs do offer that. Some schools are on quarters and not on trimesters, but a lot of the chiropractic programs are on trimesters because it's a year-round schooling program. So instead of semesters and then having a summer off, you actually just go to school year-round. And you the requirements for national boards are that you have an undergraduate degree. I believe there's 1 or 2 states where you actually don't have to have your undergraduate degree before, or excuse me, I think I'm saying that wrong. There's 1 or 2 states where you have to have your undergraduate degree before you go to chiropractic college in order to practice in that state, just because some of the state licensing rules are a little bit different. And I'm not positive what those are. But there are some states where it says that you have to have your undergraduate degree completed before going into chiropractic college. But for most states, I think it doesn't matter as long as you have a bachelor's degree and then you get your doctorate as well. And so there are prerequisite courses that are required in order to, like as part of your undergraduate degree program that you would need to have in order to get accepted into chiropractic college. And so there's an application process for that. And then when you are in chiropractic college, you have to take a couple of, one of the tests is called an OSCE, and it basically is an examination, like knowing how to do a physical examination on a patient that you have to pass at some point while you're still in school before you can complete your student. Like as a student, you get to take care of patients, but before you can fully complete that, you have to have an OSCE done. And then we have 4 parts of national boards plus a physiotherapy part of national boards. So there are 5 national boards that you need to take before you can license in any state. And then there is a state board that you need to take in order to be able to practice in your specific state, wherever it is that you go. And then yearly requirements for continuing education. So in North Carolina, for example, we have 18 hours of continuing education that we have to complete within the calendar year, and then pay the licensing board in order to renew our license each year. I think that hits the high points.
What I want people to hear is it's a really thorough process. It's not like you just decide to be a chiropractor, but you actually have a lot of academics and education and residency experiences to go through. So I'm going to let
Yes,
Amanda ask you some questions now.
for sure.
Hi, Lindsay. Nice to meet you.
Hi. It's
Okay,
nice to meet you too.
so fascinating, and I love the homeschool thing, but I want to focus back in on the chiropractic thing. And also, one of the things we do on this podcast is we talk about how do you integrate your faith into your practice of your practice. And so I'm thinking that there might be, with that cross around your neck, something you can specifically say to that. So I'd like to ask that question first and then come back in with a follow-up just about chiropractic stuff.
Yeah. So one of my patients actually gave this to me today. This is
Mhm.
she's one of my elderly patients, and her husband passed last year, and she's just so sweet. She's a day maker. Every single time she comes in, she loves on me, and she'll bring me jewelry every once in a while. And this was just such a pretty piece. And she said, I never wear it anymore. And I know that it's your birthday tomorrow, and I wanted you to have it. And I thought it was so beautiful. So I'm glad that you noticed it. Thank you. So one of the things about chiropractic in general is that, and I can't speak on behalf of anyone other than myself, but as a chiropractor, I know and firmly believe that the body was actually designed to heal itself, which is why if you didn't have a band-aid and you got a cut, it would still heal, because your body's innate ability to heal was written into you before you were even conceived. And so before you got into the world, you were made to be perfect. And if I didn't believe that, then I would spend my day trying to fix people. But I do believe that. And so what I do is I spend my day trying to support people and also remind them that they actually are self-healing. So every night when you go to sleep, even if you don't have a good night's sleep, you don't have to think about breathing. You just do while you're sleeping. And you don't have to think about cellular repair. It just happens. You don't have to think about the process of autophagy, which is when your cells actually get rid of cells that you no longer need, so that approximately every 7 years you have complete cellular turnover and you're legitimately a new entire being every 7 years. You don't have to think about any of that stuff because your creator did that for you. So all of these things and the way that we unfold in our first year and how perfect that is, if we can return to what it is that is God given to us, instead of trying to add on new things, right? So in the postpartum time period, I have a postpartum rehabilitation course because it is so important to me that women actually have the ability to fully recover after giving birth. And it's not something that's typically given. And so babies are born and they are peeing in their pants and they have a weakness in their core. So babies are actually born with what's called a diastasis of the rectus abdominis muscles, which is a separation between the two six-pack muscles in their belly. And that around 4.5 months, when they start to be able to actually cross the midline of their body intentionally. So before 4.5 months, a baby can't bring something to their mouth intentionally because they can't get past the middle and be able to access that part of their brain. So they learn to create an entire core canister of support as part of their normal natural development. The way that God designed them allowed them to actually do this without anyone teaching them how to, quote, get a stronger core. And when I learned the following fact, it absolutely blew my mind, because kids will potty train around the same time that they jump. So between ages 2 and 3 is when a child jumps, and that is when they stop wetting themselves, because they now have complete conscious control of their pelvic floor and they're able to do complex movements without any amount of urine leaking. So in the postpartum time period, instead of trying to teach women, like, here's how to do a Kegel, which doesn't actually work, and here's how to suck your belly button to your spine to make sure that you look smaller than the way that you were made, which also doesn't work, I teach women how to remember the way that they learn to move. So we revisit, okay, if you lie on your back, can you actually lie on your back without tension in your body? Because we ought to be able to do that, because that's how we spent the first couple of months of our life. And in so doing, we learned to develop core stability, and we learned to be able to pick our legs up and then move our arms and then move them with intention and then roll ourselves over and then get ourselves to crawling and then push ourselves up to sitting. And then from our seated position, go into a tripod position and then go into a half kneeling position. And then we can go to a standing position and then we can start ambulating and we can walk. And so rather than teaching new things, every single part of my practice is taking us back to the things that we actually already have within us. So we have a natural healing capability. We just need to get out of our way. So when we have a bunch of toxins that we're breathing in all day because they're spraying glyphosate on absolutely everything that you can see, and because you're eating foods that actually 50 years ago weren't even, well, probably 100 years ago now because I'm aging, but 100 years ago weren't even considered food. and it's shelf stable if the atomic bomb goes off. That's not something that you can digest. And when you're drinking water that has a bunch of impurities in it, then your body is so busy just trying to maintain homeostasis, which is a flow of the easiest way for us to exist with the least amount of effort. If we're so busy doing that, then it becomes harder for us to deal with bumps and bruises and aches and pains. But if we can return to a more natural way of living and recognize our own innate healing capabilities and our own innate movement patterns and the things that we actually came into this world with, instead of the nonsense that gets poured on top of us, then we can be so much happier, so much healthier, and actually thrive.
And so you share all
Interesting.
that
That might answer.
so you share that with your clients? That's what we're asking, is how does it, so
Oh yeah.
it's very obvious you know so much about what the creator did for us. So how do you translate that to your clients?
So so oftentimes people will talk about their discomfort in ways that is absolute or is actually in their future. And I will remind them that at some point you're going to wake up and it's not going to hurt. So why would you say, when I wake up in the morning, my foot hurts? Because it's really possible. And and if you can kind of like weasel into their brain space and let them know, oh yeah, it is. And it's possible that you could be 38 and not walk around in pain, because that's going to be me tomorrow. And if you can have a baby and not pee your pants, that's possible. If just reminding them, like, you were actually designed to function. Do you think that you were created to malfunction? Do you really think that? Because if you do, then we have a different viewpoint and a different value system, and that's okay. But I'm still going to maintain the belief that I think that you can and will actually heal. And I think that you can and will actually get better. And I think that you can and will actually be able to enjoy life. And that's sprinkled into every 15-minute visit that I have with a patient.
I love that you put in the 15-minute marker. And I also remember from your early story about your first chiropractic experience that you were not convinced by your first one. You were convinced by your last one. So let's say somebody
Yes.
says, well, now I'm curious about a chiropractor, and I don't live in
Mhm.
North Carolina near Mumma that rhymes with Puma. And what would you say are the good questions to ask a non-traditional practitioner of medicine to find out whether they're effective for you?
Yeah. So I personally teach for a continuing education group. And so motion palpation is the way that I simply, like, I don't take x-rays unless I am looking for a pathology that I found. But what I
Stop.
do, yes, ma'am.
Motion
Yes.
palpation. I think we need a
Yes.
definition.
Yes, I'll get there. So,
Okay.
what I do is I move joints to their full range of motion in order to assess if this is healthy end feel at a joint. So, if you were to pull your finger back, this is active range of motion. And then if you passively pull your finger back, you can take your finger back further. That's passive range of motion. At the end there's actually a little extra give. That's end feel of a joint. And you can tell when you have practiced the art and skill of palpation, you can tell what a healthy end feel feels like. Or if that's missing, then you can introduce motion. So palpation is simply feeling with your hands. It is not to be confused with palpitation, which is an irregular heartbeat. Palpation is simply feeling with your hands and using motion to do that. So the difference would be a static palpation, which is simply feeling your back, just like running my hand down your back right now. That would be a static palpation. I'm literally feeling things, but I'm not using motion to assess it. So what I do is I use motion palpation and what I'm looking for, one of my mentors put it very nicely, I want to feel the joints that I would feel in a healthy 10-month-old baby. That's what, if Amanda, if I was motion palpating your spine, I want to feel that your spine feels like a healthy 10-month-old baby. And I know that I'm not going to feel like a 10-month-old baby as a 37 and 364-day-old woman, but I am going to feel, I'm going to aim for that. That will be my goal. My goal will be to create the type of motion within your spine and extremities that actually feels like really healthy, young, supple joints. And so Motion Palpation Institute has a directory if you're looking for someone who practices like me. But I think for a lot of, like, I'm not the chiropractor for everybody, because I'm a chiropractor who's going to send you home with exercises. And so part of like an average chiropractic visit is actually 5 minutes long. So when I'm talking about a 15-minute appointment, that's actually 3 times as long as the average length of time that people spend with their chiropractor. And that's because I like to do additional therapies with my patients. So I do some myofascial work where I'll do, like, it seems like massage type of things, less relaxing usually than a massage. I make my patients work, and I have them do exercises, and I give them homework. So we talk about lifestyle modifications. Lifestyle modifications are things like how high my computer is elevated right now so that I'm not seated at a desk and hunched over, and things like shutting off my Wi-Fi at night so that I can rest and rejuvenate overnight, and things like drinking electrolytes with my water so that I am replenishing those as I lose them. And then we also have home exercises that we send our patients home with. So we're kind of bringing those things into each visit. And those things are important to me. Those things are not important to all patients. And so if they want to walk in somewhere and have a 5-minute visit and walk out, I'm not the chiropractor for them. So I think it's a good idea to, I mean, you can peruse a website and get kind of a general feel for what is this practitioner like. For most of us, chiropractors in general, we're easy access practitioners, and we're also typically able to help at least a little bit. No one is going to be worse off for having well-moving joints. I think for most people, it's just finding a person that they sort of jive with. And so asking your friends and family, hey, do you see a chiropractor by any chance? And if they get really excited about telling you that they see a chiropractor, then try that person out. If they're like, oh yeah, sure, sometimes, then they're not super psyched about their chiropractor. That doesn't sound like a 5 out of 5 recommendation. But I think asking are you doing active care? Are you doing passive care? And then knowing, do you want active care? Do you want the type of care that I give, which is you're going to do exercises, you're going to have homework to do, that's active care? Or do you want passive care where you're going to come in and someone's going to do things for you and then you're going to leave and you don't have anything to do later? And just knowing yourself what type of care you would actually like to have, and then finding someone that matches with you. And then, when you walk into a space and you establish rapport with whatever person is there, if you like that person or not is actually a part of your healthcare that determines whether or not you're going to get better. And that's determined within the first 7 seconds, and most of it is nonverbal. So if you walk into a room and you're like, that person doesn't feel right to me, that's probably not your chiropractor. Unfortunately, you've already booked the appointment and now you need to stick it out, but
for 5 or 15 minutes.
It just depends.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question at least a little bit?
It answers it a little bit. So let me ask you one other question. Many of us, like Lee said, are probably in circles that are open to non-traditional medicine, which I would call chiropractor non-traditional medicine compared to what people who say MD after their name are. And sometimes in families, there are, just like public school teachers and homeschoolers, differences of experience and opinion. What would you say helps bridge those differences if somebody's like, yeah, that's just witch doctory? And I know that's not true, yeah. Lindsay, let me say that out loud, but I have heard it said about.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, I've heard it said too. I typically, my approach is usually to lean into those things. I say, yeah, I am pretty scary, aren't I? And people, no, not you. And well, that's what you're saying. And so what I offer people is movement medicine, and nobody else is really checking in on that for you. And that is the role of a chiropractor, is to ensure that you are moving well. And the interesting thing, so I oftentimes, whenever people want to bring up this conversation about how, it's not, oh, well, chiropractors hurt people, or that's not real medicine, or that's quackery. The term quackery actually came from a slander that the American Medical Association did against chiropractors. And there was a massive lawsuit. The biggest to date that the AMA ever settled out of court was Wilkes versus the AMA, because the American Medical Association was slandering chiropractors. And they actually had a campaign on quackery where they were doing propaganda that chiropractors were practicing medicine without a license and that we shouldn't be trusted. And this went on for decades. And the damage was done, even though the lawsuit was settled out of court and in favor of Wilkes, who was representing chiropractors. The damage was done. And so you hear kind of the trickle effects of that. And the reason for it was simply monetarily, because the medical professionals didn't have a tool for mechanical low back pain. So mechanical low back pain means that if you take an Advil, it's not going to help your low back, because the reason for your low back pain is not chemical, it is mechanical, which means it is movement based. And so if you have mechanical low back pain, then it is not going to be helped by drugs. And if you have mechanical low back pain and you get surgery, which would not be ideal, you still have to recover from surgery, and the likelihood that you will feel better afterward is not very high. So the chiropractors were able to take care of low back pain, and the medical doctors at the time didn't really like that they were no longer seeing low back pain patients. And so they said these chiropractors are practicing medicine without a license, which was not true, because we were practicing chiropractic, which is completely different than practicing medicine. And so that usually brings people to just the idea that some ideas have been planted in their head, and they didn't generate the idea that a chiropractor shouldn't be trusted. That was an idea that was placed there by someone with an agenda, which happens a lot, unfortunately. And the other part of it is that right now, if you were to go in any major city this weekend, so I'm teaching a continuing education class this weekend in Atlanta. I'm teaching chiropractors and chiropractic students how to assess and address the upper quarter of the body. So we're working on shoulders and ribs and the upper portion of the thoracic spine and the cervical spine. And somewhere else in Atlanta, there will be an MD teaching manipulation. So MDs and athletic trainers and physical therapists are all currently learning to do joint manipulation, which is exactly what they've said for years is what chiropractors shouldn't be doing, because it's quackery and you need to stay away from us. Unfortunately, it's about the most powerful tool that we have in existence to affect the human body instantaneously, because an adjustment literally takes seconds. And if joints are not moving well and you introduce motion into those joints, you introduce the brain's capacity to what's called propriocept, which is your brain's awareness of where you are in space. So you can actually feel your body differently after an adjustment. And that is the fastest way to allow the brain to create healing in an area that is dysfunctional, because then the brain knows about it. So everywhere this weekend, there will be an ATC course, a PT course, and an MD course on manipulation, because they would like to learn to do what it is that we've been doing since 1897. So those two conversations are usually how I address it. One, that the reason why you think this is because somebody didn't like that they weren't making as much money, because chiropractors are cost-effective practitioners who are able to improve people's health nearly instantaneously. And if we can't, that patient is not any worse off. So the scare tactics that are used, I actually just saw a case study this week was sent to me with a lot of laughter, because it said chiropractic self-manipulation injures patient was the case study. Well, unless it was a licensed DC who was adjusting herself, then it wasn't a chiropractic manipulation. It was someone cracking her own neck who hurt herself. So that's not the same as someone who actually understands joint biomechanics doing an adjustment. There are a couple of the instances where people have been injured. One was a butcher doing manipulation on someone. And the idea that chiropractors will cause strokes because it causes a vertebral artery dissection. That's another one that's kind of like thrown out there. You're actually more likely to have a vertebral artery dissection going to your hair salon and putting your head in the basin than you are from seeing a chiropractor. People typically do that every 6 weeks. But there's just a lot of scare tactics that keep people from this beautiful form of natural movement medicine that's available to most people, honestly.
But we're about out of time. So Lindsay, I'd like you to tell us, because you talked about these continue ed classes, is there a way if someone's listening and maybe even they're a chiropractor that wants to know more about how you go about things, or a child that's, or a young adult that's looking at becoming a chiropractor, that do you have a website, or could people contact you? What do you
Yeah, for
suggest?
sure. So my practice website is trianglecrc.com. We live in the Triangle area, and CRC is for Chiropractic and Rehabilitation Center. Or you can just go to lindsaymumma.com, LINDSAYMUMMA. And both of those websites kind of have a lot of different things. The continuing ed company that I teach for is motionpalpation.org. And so that is continuing education for chiropractors, as well as chiropractic students can take those classes. I host student shadows in my office quite frequently. We just had a shadow 2 days ago. So sometimes we've had high school students who come in and they just kind of want to see what it's like to be a chiropractor. Like, am I interested enough in this to consider that I would like to make this a career path? I'm happy to host students. And then very frequently we have, chiropractic students who come and shadow. And on occasion, we also will have college students who are thinking of going to chiropractic college and they want to see, is this really what I want to do? So we have shadows in the office. And so actually office mom at trianglecrc.com is who you would email if you wanted to shadow at my office, if you're near Raleigh and you want to check it out. But yeah, I love sharing chiropractic with people and just the ability for us to trust that our body can naturally heal. So thank you for allowing me to share a little bit about this. I appreciate it.
Well, when you brought up a whole new subject, Amanda, we need to have a podcast on, and that's opportunities for young people to shadow professionals to make that decision. So thank you, Lindsay.
Yeah.
And thank you, Amanda. We'll
Yes,
have you
add me to
back.
that list. I'm happy to host.
Okay. Bye.
Thank
Have a
you.
great day. Bye.
You too.